So what I've had since 4 years ago when I knew, or maybe almost 5 years ago now, knew nothing about my Jeep, I bought the cheapest lift kit, this Rough Country 2.5-inch suspension with their nitro shocks. So right now I just spent a lot of money. I bought the Savvy 3-inch configurable lift kit. So right now I'm just focusing for today on replacing the shocks and springs, but I also have control arms, track bars are in the box. They came with some little rear sway bar extenders. But anyway, first thing, so we're going to put in the coils and shocks. So what I'm going to do, obviously take off the tires, 3/4 inch or whatever keyed lugs you guys have, loosen it on the ground, then we're going to jack up, take the tires off, and then we'll start working on, before we get the springs out, we're going to remove the shocks and disconnect the sway bar, and then that should be it. Alright, so I've got it jacked up. I took both tires off. I put some jack stands under the frame just for safety. Next step, we're going to remove the sway bar links on both sides. So it's a 3/4 and a 5/8. Loosen that just to get that out of the way. Same thing on the other side, then we're going to move over to the shock. Shock on the bottom, it's a 1/2-inch nut and bolt, and comes out pretty easy. Now we're going to go for the top, which you should be able to get at from up here. Looks like another 1/2-inch. Sorry, it's a 9/16 actually. And on the passenger side, so if you have the stock fenders, you're probably gonna have to open up. So unscrew this worm clamp, take this off, open up the airbox. There will be 3 8mm, and you can take the airbox off and reach it from the top. But for me, with the metal close, I can just get at it right here. Again, a 9/16 to get the top off on the passenger side for the shock. And just take note of, you see you have these like washers and rubber things, just in case if you're reinstalling, just take note of the order of them. So if the shock spins while you're trying to get this nut off, just get a vice grips right on here and it'll stop that. So next, what you want to do, jack the vehicle up as much as possible and get your jack stands as high as possible. This actually isn't as high as they go, but basically it got to the point where then I released the jack that was under the axle, so the vehicle's held on the frame by the jack stands, and the control arms are what's stopping it next. So if you really wanted, you could remove the control arm, but I'm not going to go that far. What I'm going to use are spring compressors. But right before I put those on, so what I'm going to do, so again, I got the vehicle up pretty damn high on these jack stands, dropped the axle. Then what I did was I took the jack under one side, jacked that up to lower the other side even more. So you can see it's pretty extended right now. If you had stock springs, you might even be able to pull it out just like this. Mine, it's close, I can move it, but so I'm going to put these, you can rent these at AutoZone, just spring compressors. I'm going to get them on opposite sides where they're accessible, start them as big as possible, and tighten them down, they'll compress until I can pull the spring right off this bottom and out and down. So a quick piece of advice, when you're using the spring compressors, make sure they're on opposite sides and turn them down, not all the way at once, otherwise the spring's going to move weirdly, so turn it down a little this way, back and forth, back and forth. Next, so these are where the Rough Country 2.5-inch, right next to the Savvy 3-inch front springs. And you can see the Rough Country ones, first of all, one, they're like almost 5 years old and have over 30,000 miles on them, but they're actually larger than the Savvy ones. I really messed up though. I should have measured the height with the vehicle sitting, because there could be a different K, a different spring compression factor. So it's possible these ones won't compress nearly as easily as these, which would be better. And they could still theoretically be larger, even though the spring itself, when uncompressed, is not as large. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. The kit came with new bump stops, and it wants you to drill and tap a 7/16. So you drill a 7/16 hole into here, and then tap 1/2 inch. I started, and then as I thought about it, I decided I don't want to do it, because then it's going to be a real pain. Anytime you want to take the springs out, you'll have to unbolt it with the spring still on, and that one piece is just so thick, it's like really hard to get through like the spaces in the spring. So I'm going to go with, I don't know if you saw my old method, but I just used some silicone and hockey pucks, and I'm going to keep the top stock bump stop too. I mean, they have one that screws in, which would work just as well, but I'm just going to leave it stock. It doesn't really matter too much to me. Here are the new shocks in. You reuse the same lower nut and bolt, but at the top you have a new 3/4 inch. Tighten this to 17 foot-pounds, these to 21 foot-pounds, and same on the other side. So front's installed. Before I start the rear, I measured from exactly this line to here, and it was 24 inches and 3/8 of an inch. So we'll see with the new stuff if it's any taller. Doing the rear is mostly the same. The shock has a 15 mil and 18 millimeter nut and bolt, and then the top has a 9/16. They're actually square up here, but they should be welded. But if not, you can put a 9/16 on the square bolt and hold it in place. And the kit actually came with extensions for the rear sway bar, so we're going to take this off shortly. I think it is let's see. Yeah, it's an 18 on this side, and probably 15 again on the other side of that, same as the lower shock bolt. Let's just confirm. Yep. In comparison with the rear shocks, the Savvy one's quite a bit bigger. This looks like almost a solid 2 inches bigger. It's crazy. I realized to put the new track bar bracket on in the rear, we're going to have to get rid of this and drill some holes and all that. And I realize it'll be impossible with the spring there, so I'm going to do it while the spring's off. So it's a T55 Torx bit. And there's like a lock nut on the back to get this out. Got the old track bar out. It's easy if you do the upper end first, which is a 15 and 18 mil. This is the Torx end. Okay, so the new track bar bracket for the rear requires some drilling and welding. So I just mocked the thing up, punched some holes, drilled them stepping up all the way to 5/16 was the size for holes. And then we are going to need to weld it at the bottom. You can see that where is it? The bottom of it comes unpainted. It's already clean for you to weld. I don't actually have a welder yet, but I should be getting my dad's in a couple weeks. I'll be able to practice and then work with that. But so anyway, I got that mocked up, so now I should be able to at least bolt on the bracket. Should be good enough for now, and then we'll weld it later. Make sure to, I'm going to clean this with some brake cleaner and paint in, just to prevent a little rust there. That's drawing, I'm going to put in these lower control arms, so the huge ones here. Make sure you make sure they're the same length as stock, and when you put them in, you want to make sure these grease fittings point down. That way you can access them. And yeah, they actually seem to go in a lot smoother than the stock with the rubber bushing. We're going to put these in next. So before I disconnect the upper control arms, I reinstalled the new sway bar links. They get 40 foot-pounds of torque. So next step, I remove the upper control arms in the rear. It's all 15 millimeters all the way around. I had to use the double wrench trick, which my dad taught me. So if you kind of get a wrench, oh man, it's going to be a pain to do it like this, but you kind of get it so you just get more leverage and torque on it. This is not showing you how to do it well at all. Hold on. So it would be like this. If I wanted to turn the wrench this way, I do it like this. And so there are also some emergency brake attachments. They're 1/2-inch nuts on both. Just going to remove them, and I'm just going to have to zip tie when I put in the new upper control arms, which are right here. Okay, so next I installed the track bar bracket. So there are 3 1/2-inch bolts and 1 3/4 inch. Make sure you do all the 1/2-inch ones first, because you can't do them once the 3/4 inch one is in. And also put Loctite on them. And lastly, again, we had to do this with the upper track bar out to get access to this one and the 3/4 inch one from here. Otherwise, you can't get those. So I installed just the upper part of the rear track bar, torqued to 74 foot-pounds. Since it's not double adjustable like the control arms, I'm going to wait until everything's back on it. Probably center the axle and then install the lower part. So that'll probably be one of the last things that I do. So for now, it's going to kind of just dangle here. Let me just try and get it out of the way. There you go. See, it's just dangling. Yeah, I guess next would be the upper control arms again. And we're almost there. Alright, so all the control arms are installed. It takes a little bit of effort. Note with the uppers now, so they come with new bolts. You can go through these holes in the frame, make it a lot easier. So the uppers are all going to get tightened to 55 foot-pounds, and all the lowers are going to get tightened to 130 foot-pounds. And then, I bought these Rough Country shock relocation brackets since we're going to rotate the axle around. So they just have some 13 millimeter bolts that go in the back, this little like crush sleeve, and some 18 and 15 millimeter nut and bolt. And then you put your shock here and use these 2 washers that came with the kit as little spacers right there for the shock. Yeah. The lower control arms, when you're torquing them, they use a 7/8 bolt and a 13/16 nut. And then also, so the bolts and nuts, the bolts provided for the upper control arms are really slightly too big. And I messed mine up getting it through this tiny hole. So either drill it out, or I totally messed up the bolt and I'm just going to end up putting a stock bolt back through here. Like, it was so messed up on the other side I couldn't thread the nut on. But yeah. So once I got all the control arms in, I put in these springs and then the shocks. The shock lower mount gets tightened to 74 and the top gets 24 foot-pounds. they reused the original bolts. Absolutely blowing my mind right now. But so remeasuring, it's exactly 28 inches. So that's a 3 5/8 inch difference from what it was previously. I honestly am like losing my mind right now. Like, did I mess it up? Was my first measurement incorrect? Because these springs were only supposed to be 1/2 inch larger. Only disconnecting the front track bar. It's a 18 millimeter cotter pin and nut up here, and a 15 mil on the axle side. You can see that double wrench trick. Just got this one loose. I could not find a 5/8 inch bolt that would work with my drill. This is the only one I could find. I went to like Tractor Supply, O'Reilly's, AutoZone, Lowe's. Could not find one. This one's too big. So I ended up drilling out this hole to 5/8 inch with a 1/2 inch bit. Took me probably almost an hour and a half worth of my time, but I finally just got it big enough to support this bolt. So then what we're going to do is basically bolt this in. It goes to 125 foot-pounds up there, 50 foot-pounds, or sorry, 75 foot-pounds at the axle side. So if you don't want to reuse the old bolt here, Blackmagic Brakes sells an ARP strength 13 mil that you can use. I tighten that to 55 foot-pounds, tighten the jam nut as much as possible with the big crescent, and then I did that the socket over here, so the nut was 1 inch and the socket was 15/16, and I got that all tightened. Now it's all tight. The front, upper, and lower control arms are basically the same process. Front uppers have a little different mount up here, kind of very tight. And the lowers, I bought the Johnny Joint washers. Just they kind of go in the hole with like the inside, the nipple pointing in, and you won't use the actual washers that came with the kit. And then we'll tighten them up just like the rear. The upper control arms in the front, you either have to drill out the hole that's in the bushing there, or you can reuse the old bolts. That's what I chose to do. And then as far as getting this mount on in the uppers, I had to use this. It's like the spreader vice grip to get it wide enough. Otherwise, I really could not get it wide enough to fit over that bushing. You could also replace the bushings at this time if you want, but I'm not choosing to. So the full lift is installed, but I'm going to do a separate video for doing a full 4x4 alignment to set up, pinion angles, caster, the lengths of these control arms, centering the axle.